how would you love to?
Well,
Okay. Great. Hello, good evening, everybody, whether you are here in the room or through that little camera up there. Hello. Welcome to our AGM. In addition to us electing a committee for 2022 later, this is my opportunity to summarise for you all the fabulous things that the 2021 committee has done. First, though, I think we need, if Sam is online, hopefully, this is technical fun stuff, not my area, we need to approve the minutes from the 2020 AGM. So Sam, if you are online, can you please, or whoever's got them?
I am here, Rach.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see you there. Can you
Great.
please share the minutes from 20, sorry, so that we can, and then take us through them so we can get those approved.
Okay, can you give me another minute then? Because I just need to actually get them shared on my screen. So hang on and bear with me. Okay, my next challenge is going to be sharing these on Zoom. Rach, how do I do that? Can you hear me? Rachel, can you hear me?
Samantha, just to let you know, I can hear you, but I can't hear Rachel.
No, I can't hear Rachel either.
Sam, Balath, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Thank you, Rachel.
Rach, I was going to share these minutes on my screen, but I'm not, I need to be allowed to by the host, evidently.
To allow that to happen. Everybody, sorry, please bear with us. We will be there momentarily. Yes. I think what I'm going to do then, I'm going to carry on. We're going to go through slightly different order then. I'm going to do my summary here, and then we'll do the minutes after. Hope that is on.
Okay, so Sam should be able to share.
Oh, okay, no, not Sam. You should be able to share now, Sam.
Okay, bear with me.
Should we host this? There they are. Sam, do you want to take everyone through those?
Yeah.
Section by section.
Right, so these are the minutes from our AGM in 2020, which took place on the 14th of October. It was obviously an online event given circumstances at the time. We began with Rachel as chair, welcoming the group, confirming that the AGM was quorate and reporting on the activities over the course of 2020. We then approved the minutes held from the previous AGM in December 2019. We then went through the motions and voting to elect the new committee for 2021, with Rachel as chair, Donna as vice chair, me as secretary, Max as budget manager, and then other committee members. I'll let you read those for yourselves. Rachel then took us through an outline plan of proposed activities for 2021, with particular focus being the work around future of lobbying. We then went through the group council nominees, which were Donna Castle and Vernon Hunt, who then each gave an overview of what they would bring to council if they were elected and how they would represent all lobbyists. Mandy Pierce, President-elect, then shared her focus areas for 2021 and the important role that the public affairs community plays in the CIPR. And finally, we had our guest speaker, Baroness Ros Altman, following some technical difficulties, who shared with us the highlights of her career, which included her role as a former pensions minister and also as a sitting member of the House of Lords. So does anyone have any corrections or amendments to those minutes at all? I take that as a no. So if there are no
Was one, we need an S. Where was that? Oh yeah, point 5, it needs an.
Sorry, Rach, 0.5 needs what?
An S after.
Public affairs, okay. Any further corrections? In which case, can we take those minutes as approved with that additional S being added?
For a second. There we go. Right, let's try again. I'm taking, there's no objections to that, and they've been proposed and seconded by everybody present. Yes, I'm getting lots of nods here. Sam, thank you very much for that. Hopefully we've got no more technical challenges for the moment. So let's crack on with my bit. This is the best bit, the self-indulgent moment. I could not be more proud of what we have achieved as a committee this year. As you all well know, the committee are volunteers, and there are other significant demands on their time and also challenges in life in general that can pull us away from wherever we have been heading. And so before I go into my full summary, can I please ask you all to show thanks to the 2021 committee and show how much you appreciate their time and commitment. Thank you. Now moving on. As I mentioned, it's been a quiet year for lobbyists. Yeah, okay. It's been a busy year, but a good year for lobbyists. I was going to list the scandals, but I think the phrase "too many to mention" is appropriate here. John Gurlis and I have spent far too much time on the phone to one another, assessing whether we should be commenting on something, and if we do, ensuring that it builds on our position. Fortunately, this is where we have spent a lot of time in 2021. In January and February, we invited you to work with us in defining our position. The diverse nature of this group, freelance, agency, in-house, not-for-profit, and even public sector, meant that we were able to publish something that works for everyone. And no offense meant to anyone involved, but it's really not rocket science. Now, I may be doing it wrong, but transparent and ethical lobbying seems so much more straightforward than being dodgy. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, in April, we launched our position paper alongside action-orientated commitments from the CIPR. Everyone else was on the news and social media complaining about the current legislation and calling for reform. We want reform too, but we're not just going to sit and wait for change. We wanted to lead by example. So we committed, just a quick reminder for you all, to redouble efforts to promote transparent and ethical lobbying practices, to reinvest in UKLR and improve it and make it more attractive and seen as setting the standard, to form a standing committee to lead the work overseeing lobbying regulation professional standards, and to support future public affairs professionals through a partnership with I Have a Voice. A massive thank you to Vernon Hunt, who organised and chaired our first event with I Have a Voice. And thank you to Rebecca Deegan, founder of I Have a Voice, for working with us. I look forward to much more collaboration between CIPR and I Have a Voice in the future. With all of your help, we've also contributed to consultations and select committee hearings, building on our messaging and continuing campaign for lobbying reform. The work we have done in 2021 has positioned CIPR as an authoritative voice for ethical and transparent lobbying. Thank you all for your support and input. I'm sure when the new chair takes over later this evening, you will continue to support them and their committee. Before we move on to the election, but just so you're all aware, the microphone keeps dropping out, so press the button. That's why it looks a bit weird. Before we move on to the election part, and someone else gets to lead this awesome group, I want to personally thank the committees that I have led over the last 3 years. This is my own test, I remember everybody. So I want to thank Max, Sam, Rob, John, Alan, Neil, Valath, Dan, Pete, Az and Donna, and a special mention to my partner in crime, Donna. Yeah, Donna, I could not have led our amazing committees over the last 3 years without you, your counsel and your friendship, so thank you. If everyone here or anyone here or online has ever considered getting involved more with CIPR and volunteering with a group, do it. I've been a part of the CIPR Public Affairs group for 8 years. I've had some incredible experiences, spoken at all sorts of events and met friends for life. I can honestly say the last 3 years have been just mind-blowing. As I mentioned earlier, my first proper event was supposed to be the Brexit party, March 2019. I think that set the tone perfectly for what was going to happen while I was chair. And as those of you who know me well, know I do love a bit of chaos. So actually, it suited me perfectly. And now let's hand over to Sam for the elections for this year.
Rachel,
yes, you're back with us.
I am back with you. Are the slides going up?
1 second. Poor Max is running backwards and forwards, checking microphones and things.
The technical gremlins are out in force tonight.
The technical gremlins want us to be all back to normal as well. Sam, did you make Sam host? If you made Sam host, she will need to make you host again.
I don't need to be, I just need to be able to see the slide.
Yeah, but you are. That was select, if you can select Max and make Max host. Because we made you host. It's a good job with lobbyists, not technical people.
Yeah, seriously. I'm really sorry. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, there's 3, you should have 3 dots that shows you the participants list, or bring down the participant list.
Yeah, got it.
And then, oh, there we go. You should be able to right click on Max and make him host.
Doing my best.
Excellent. It's quite funny because the microphone keeps dropping out as I keep trying to say something.
Okay, that should be it.
Hi, Stephen. I wasn't trying to pry, by the way. I realise now how that looks. I genuinely just a bit airy-fairy with things, and I was just like, oh, I think Stephen knows her, literally. So, but just please, just don't reply at all anything about that. Just completely leave it. And yeah, if you.
So I can see the slides now. Can we go to the new committee slide, please?
One sec.
Perfect, great, lovely. So this AGM has been invited to elect a new committee to take post from the 1st of January to the 31st of December 2022. And there are two key nominations that we're going to be going through tonight. The first is for the group chair, and the second is a block nomination for committee members. So if we start with the group chair, we're going to vote on each in turn, and Rachel, I'm going to need your help with hands up from the room. So everybody who's online, when I ask you to, please use the hands up icon in Zoom, and everyone in the room do the same with their real hands, if that makes sense. So Max Sugarman has been nominated for group chair by me and seconded by Rachel Clamp. All in favor, please put your hands up digitally or physically.
Congratulations, Max.
Thank you. Congratulations, Max. Next slide, please. And then we have 6 committee members that we'll be voting for as a block. They have all been nominated and seconded by CIPR members. So if we could have a hands up to show approval of those 6 joining the committee for 2022, please. And I'm assuming that that's passed. I can't actually see the room now.
Yeah, it was seven from the room, unanimous from the room.
Great. So thank you, everyone, and congratulations to the new committee for 2022.
Congratulations, everybody. That's it from me. I'm done. Well, I'm not. As you saw, going to continue the committee, supporting Max. Thank you, everybody, for supporting us again through 21. 22, hopefully, we'll have less of this technical stuff and more of this in-person stuff. We are going to take a pause now and be back at 6:30 for the incredible panel, Good Cop, Bad Cop. Was COP26 a success for the Johnson government? That gives you all time to go and see if you aren't watching a separate screen. We aren't in the room. Some people have been checking phones. What the press conference has told us. We'll see you all later.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Hello everyone. Hello everyone in the room and hello online. My name is Max Sugarman and I'm now the chair-elect of CIPR Public Affairs Group, which is great. If you're joining online, hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, I think we're monitoring the chat, so please do write in there that you can, if you can or can't. Tonight we're looking at COP26 and whether it was a good COP or bad COP for the Johnson government. And we are going to particularly look at what it means for the government, what it means for politics, what it means for the environment, and what it means for the future generally. We're recording the event, so please be aware of that. If you're in the room, just be aware that you're also being recorded as well. So please try and just sort of keep quiet and until we're if you have any questions that we can bring you in. And if you're online, you can write questions via the chat. And I think actually we probably can bring you in. So if you do want to be brought in, please just say, and we'll try and bring you in as well. Okay, so we've got some really good speakers here tonight. So thank you very much all for joining us. So we've got a pollster, we've got someone from the Conservative wing of the party, someone from the Labour wing of the party, and a public affairs professional. So we've kind of got everything you'd want and need to analyse COP26. So I'm going to just start off by asking each of our panellists to say a quick sort of intro about how they felt about COP26, whether they saw it as a good COP or bad COP, and generally any views they have on what its impact is. So I'm going to just start off with a bit of an intro about everyone. So we've first got Chris Hopkins, who's Political Research Director at Savanta Comres. He's a market researcher and data visualizer and statistician, and has a history of working in the political research industry at Savanta Comres, and also as data visualization and statistics specialist at the House of Commons. Welcome, Chris. We've got Jill Morris, who's founder of Connect Communications and described as the most influential woman in public affairs, and has over 30 years experience and is widely recognised for lobbying activity and being sort of the forefront of public affairs practice. And of course a fellow of the CIPR as well, so welcome Jill. We have John Flesher, Head of International Programmes at the Conservative Environment Network. He was previously policy advisor to Zach Goldsmith, where he managed his environmental campaigns and helped support the illegal wildlife trade conference in 2018 as well. Before that, worked in Parliament. And then we've also got Councillor Rishi Madlani, executive member of CIPR, the Labour's environmental campaign, which founded in 1973. I didn't realise it was that old. Neither am I. And it's the only environmental group affiliated to Labour, and you're a councillor in Camden and executive member of CIPR, and I believe you work in sustainable finance as well, so you can bring your expertise with that as well. So I'm going to start off by handing over to Chris and just asking you to give us your thoughts on COP26.
Yeah, thank you, Max. And yeah, I guess the easiest way to start this is that I'm probably not going to give you my thoughts at all. I'm going to try and give you the public's thoughts. And obviously, you're thinking about this this event and the title. Was it a good COP or a bad COP? Definitely feels like it was a good COP or maybe just an okay COP. And I think that's ultimately the proof is going to be in the pudding. And I think that the public will ultimately end up judging success of COP about whether the governments around the world, and especially in the UK, and this is really focused on UK public opinion, about whether they end up hitting their commitments and hitting their targets. You know, just asking just generally about what they thought of COP, whether it was a success or a failure in terms of certain things. But generally speaking, the majority of the public said it succeeded in bringing attention to the issue of climate change, and also, but not to a slightly lesser extent, succeeding in putting in place practical plans to effectively tackle climate change. More also say that it was more successful than unsuccessful in enabling world leaders to work constructively together, which is obviously one of the key aims, getting everyone, I guess, in the proverbial room, and also allowing small nations to have a more prominent voice in the climate change debate. And we did also include in the poll that we did recently, sort of ahead of this event, whether COP was successful in rebutting conspiracy theorists and those who do not believe in man-made climate change. And that was the statement that had sort of less success than any other. 43% said it was successful to 35 unsuccessful, and that was, like I say, the narrowest kind of result. Overall, when we looked at some of the individual kind of commitments that governments sort of committed to at COP26, the public were really supportive of them, but ultimately it's not a surprise. And the net support, support minus opposed, was between sort of +50 and +70, and we haven't really seen much sort of similar figures. The comparable ones that I can think of are when it comes to furlough and things like that in the last sort of year and a half, 18 months. So I think about ending deforestation by 2030 had a huge number of supporters. Cutting methane emissions had a huge number of supporters, but it's very difficult, I think, for the public to really oppose any of these things, because ultimately they're supposed to be positives and they're supposed to help the planet. The one that did have the highest number, or the largest number of opposition, or largest proportion of opposition, was the one related to having net zero carbon bans and things like that. And I can imagine that there are possibly just some angry people that don't want their petrol heads. Ultimately, they want to keep their cars. Despite this, the high levels of support for each of these, I think the public were generally speaking less convinced whether the UK itself specifically or other countries generally were going to ever hit these targets. And there was a little bit of a sort of correlation between the targets that were due to be hit by 2030. Generally speaking, the public were less likely to think that they were going to be hit based on the ones that were aiming for 2040. Also, the interesting trend that we found, and naturally maybe this is just to be expected because it's UK public opinion, but the public did seem to think that the UK were more likely to hit each of these targets than other countries, generic other countries were. And that was true particularly when we were looking at major economies and poorer economies as well, whether they were going to hit their targets to reduce their coal emissions. I think while all that seemed very positive, I think it's worth pointing out that only a third said that COP will result in any significant action to tackle climate change. And I think that's really where ultimately the proof will end up being in the pudding. I think that there is a sense from the public that this was a bit of a talking shop, and it goes back to that earlier point that yes, it succeeded in bringing countries together to talk about these things. It succeeded in raising awareness of climate change, but is it actually going to succeed in doing anything actionable to sort of make the changes that I think the world needs? But yeah, still ultimately people did say that the positives did outweigh the negatives when it comes to COP. 42% said that the positives outweigh the negatives, whereas 28% said that the negatives outweigh the positives. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you very much for that. That's a real sort of big picture of how the public are thinking about it, and it seems quite mixed in a way, positives and negatives there. So if I could then pass over to John, so as Head of International Programs at the Conservative Environment Network, whether you can say a bit about how you found COP.
Sure, thank you, and thanks very much for having me to speak. I think the last 2 weeks have been the first 2 weeks I've had off this year for not thinking about COP. So you dragged me back in, so thank you very much for that. I should say at the outset, for those of you who aren't familiar with what the Conservative Environment Network does, we're an independent forum separate from the party, but for Conservatives who care about decarbonisation and conservation, and we work with our caucus in Parliament of, I think we're now over 120 Conservative MPs and peers. We've got a network of local councillors, grassroots supporters, and now we're working internationally with centre-right parties across the world, which is kind of my gig at SEM. I think I'd start looking at COP by thinking about the context in which it was taking place. I think for all the importance that people like us attach to this, we have to recognise that the level of engagement that most people have with COP began on the 1st of November and ended on the 12th of November. And I think we can obsess about it, but actually I think the general perception from most people was then that clearly this was a story that began a very long time ago when the UK assumed its presidency. A couple of kind of context points I'd bring in at that point is that, for obvious pandemic related reasons, governments across the world, ourselves, our own very much included, have had other priorities over the last year. And I think that COP was a pretty tough gig for whoever was holding the pen at this point to actually get that level of engagement, not just in terms of time and focus, but actually on resources as well. You've seen a huge expenditure by most governments across the world on fighting the pandemic, and climate change, for all the fact that it has gone up in the list of public concerns, hasn't been number one for most of this year. So it wasn't an easy place to start. And I think on the domestic political scene, much of the engagement from MPs on the Labour side and on the Conservative side, I think inevitably perhaps focused on the government's domestic record on climate. I feel like every time Alok Sharma stood up and spoke in the chamber, he got kind of flack from the other side about you're not doing enough on the UK's record, and praise from the Tory side on you're doing a great job on the UK's record. But actually both of those things ignored what his job was, which was sitting in this international space. That yes, the UK's record is highly relevant to that, but it's not actually what he was there to do. And I think that was a slight frustration for me as someone dealing with it. And I think you've got to remember, of course, he sits astride the UK and the UN on this. This was a UK and UN summit. The UK could go in and did, I think, a good job in setting a lot of the priorities, but I think it missed the fact that, you know, this was only a success or a failure because of what everyone else did, not just because of what we did as a country. I think turning to the wins itself from COP, and I think they were considerable despite some of the drawbacks. I think the three things I really pull out as successes, and on all three, I think the UK can take particular credit for them. The first one, the kind of technical point that the deal, the Glasgow Climate Pact that was reached now includes a commitment to review each country's climate plan annually, whereas previously it was every 5 years. And I think that there's something about the very act of having a COP where you have to come with a new plan that I think really actually helps to drive ambition and kind of shows up those players who, you know, I think we all know who they are, who don't actually come with the ambitious enough plans. And I think that's a really, really significant step for ramping up ambition. It means that COP27 next year in Egypt is going to be considerably more significant than it would have been. I think on net zero targets, I think Alok Sharma made a particular priority on getting a global agreements on net zero. And if you look at when the UK assumed the presidency elect in 2019, net zero targets covered about 30% of the global economy. They now cover over 90% of the global economy. And you've got the USA, China, India. I think we can all be skeptical about the extent to which those net zero targets are genuine and the action required to get there, but it's undoubtedly a positive step. We moved in that direction. And I think on coal, the media focus at the end of the conference inevitably focused on this phase down versus phase out point, which is clearly a huge disappointment that it wasn't phase out. But again, at the same time, I really would recognise there has never been a commitment at any COP before from all of the parties to commit to getting rid of coal in any fashion. And I think the fact we did that is a sign that the death knell for coal has been sounded. The question is now, can we move fast enough to get rid of it? And I think it's really important that, you know, the PM talked about coal cars, cash and trees. To a long time, I think coal was the really crucial one if you're actually looking at near-term emissions reductions. And I think beyond the formal pact itself, one of the UK's great successes was some of this creating coalitions of the willing around it. So I think where you have a system based on consensus, you inevitably have to go as fast as the slowest runner, whereas I think some of the things around it that didn't come into the pact on cutting methane emissions, which is going to be absolutely crucial, on ending support for fossil fuel financing overseas, and particularly, I think the UK deserves a lot of credit for the work it did on deforestation and halting and reversing deforestation by 2030, where I think you had a huge financial commitment and a huge political commitment from countries like Brazil and Indonesia and Colombia, which are huge rainforest commodity producers, to get around the table and to make commitments on that. And that was very specifically led by the UK. And this isn't to say, having pointed out those three things, that there isn't an awful lot more to do. I mean, the sad truth is at the end of it, we are still far short of where we need to be in terms of action to reach that keeping 1.5 alive point that was done. I think it's fair to say we've kept it within reach. I don't think it's gone forever. And we have closed the gap, and the estimates vary on exactly the extent to which that gap has been closed, but we can't pretend that we don't need a significant ramping up at future COPs next year and every year after that, particularly up to 2030, and particularly on things like climate finance and fossil fuel phase out, if we actually want to move to the situation of feeling like we've actually made some meaningful progress towards the ultimate aims of stopping climate change. I would just say, I think as a final point, you asked me to say a bit more about how it played with the Conservative Party itself. I think it's no surprise that this COP being held in Glasgow, hosted by the UK, did have more engagement than anything like this ever has done before, not just in the Conservative Party, but across all political parties in this country. And it was great to actually have MPs being able to come up to Glasgow and feel like they had some sense of personal ownership and involvement and things. We ran events there, and you know, we're very pleased with the engagement that we had with it. But I think COP I see much more as a kind of staging post in a kind of wider journey for the Conservative Party, rather than a kind of watershed moment where suddenly we went, oh, this really matters. I think there has been a move for a long time, and that, you know, Sen's been, I hope, part of achieving it, but I think the Conservative Party's grown and really wants to be seen to own this issue and actually to own it. I mean, you know, we've got 120 MPs in our caucus. They didn't come to us by magic. They come to us because they feel a political pressure to do this. I think some of them genuinely are personally committed to it, but I think combined, you've got a real sense that this is quite possibly the defining issue of our times, pandemic aside, and I think there's a real desire to engage with that. And you know, we're inundated by Conservative MPs at the moment who want to do more on climate and on environmental issues more widely. And to my mind, that can only be a good thing. And I think COP probably acted as a catalyst for a bit of that, but I think it was more a sign of a phenomenon that already existed and probably expanded it and the level of engagement that we see. So I mean, there's plenty more I could say, but I will leave it there. But thank you very much for having me.
That's really fascinating. Thank you very much, John. So Jill, I'm going to pass to you next, and just say a bit. I mean, you're Secretariat for the APPG on Net Zero, and you've done a lot of public affairs on decarbonisation, various different areas. I just wondered if you could say a few comments about sort of how public affairs professionals and businesses as well are looking at COP26.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just answer the question, was it a good or bad?
Yes,
because that's what I was going to say.
Yes.
And yeah, the answer stands, it was neither. There were good bits and there were bad bits. A lot of that was, I think, expectations running high, you know, a Conservative government supporting a Cumbrian coal mine, you know, the domestic agenda versus the international agenda. And, you know, remembering, you know, this is in Scotland, in Glasgow, and it's a huge opportunity for the UK to really show off innovation, you know, going further, going faster, you know, really making a real impact to say, yeah, we are leading the way. So in my view, you may not agree, but I don't think they ticked that box. I think it was okay. I think, I know Alex Sharma had sleepless nights, as John Prescott did in Kyoto, and all of those things, as you rush to that one thing that we got out of this whole, let's say, COP circus, because you need to come up with something that's going to say, yeah, it is a good COP, and that's what we did. And I think we're absolutely right. There were some good things, absolutely no way I would say they weren't, but I would say it's not enough. And I say a lot at the moment about saying it's very good, whether it's social care or whatever, it's not enough to tackle the problem. And the Net Zero APPG, the reason we're there, and we worked collaboratively as possible across all the parliamentary groups, and you know, we held a session there in the green zone, which is not the blue zone, which is another issue, I think, for why it was a bad COP, because it was quite, it wasn't inclusive, it was quite separate. And in terms of consensus building, I think it was a problem. But that's just a personal, professional feeling that you were outside the actual, and goodness me, it's huge. I mean, we could all live very happily together without that separation. So I think around consensus not being, you know, not being enough, the acceleration that's needed, which has been subsequent by the Climate Change Committee, it says we are not going to get to we're not going to get to 1.5 if all of these things are done by 2030. No way. And that's been said, and people sort of know that. Points that both of you have mentioned, which I think are really relevant to this discussion, whether it was good or bad, is the general public, and that view that you've got the public, and there are climate change deniers. My cousin's one of them, or you know, even you know, you can go anywhere. But particularly on electric vehicles. I'm being anecdotal here, I run my own polling, but you know, people say, "Oh, do you think that's going to happen?" I said, "It's happening." You know? But people got to wake up and realise. You know, we did a tour to Tesla. You know, we got MPs and had a good cross section, you know, organising that. And obviously I got a free umbrella, which I was very happy with. Very good. That's probably the closest I'll get to a Tesla. But Well, the point being is that there were opportunities to really capture some things outside the COP actual agenda, from an all-party parliamentary group or collaborative space. It wasn't very effective because we had basically an afternoon, a couple of hours, and we were talking about, we worked together. The main point there, and we had a few international speakers as well, but in terms of what we wanted, and in terms of the communication, the impact, it was pretty poor. It was just 11 parliamentary groups all shoved in green zone, and it was good, but in terms of impact, it was literally net zero as far as I'm concerned. But that's what was there. Remember, there is a pandemic, and remember they had a year longer. The word shambles comes to mind in terms of the organisation and the communication, and as a communications professional, it was pretty poor. But as somebody who had never been to a COP before, and everybody was very excited, the MPs were very excited, a lot of MPs didn't really understand how important it was. Again, confusion about whether you could go in the blue zone or the green zone. If you had the blue pass, could you go in that one? And basically, if you went one way, they said, no, you can't come in here, you would go over there, you had to do the passes. Again, similar to party conference this year, we all started off really very, very strict, putting out COVID tests, and all of that organisation was there, and long distance social distancing. So for me, it didn't feel that we were in, it was like we were in a bubble, but there were two separate bubbles, and then there were lots of, it's like an aero bar around Glasgow of all kinds of things going on. But the distances, and again, there were buses and whatever, we didn't feel like you would do, say in the Midland Hotel or Brighton the Grand or whatever, that you were actually there. Now, certain people did. Now, I was really privileged, or I was in, I took people to a net zero house, that's really good. We did that kind of thing, actually seeing what that looked like on visits, but that was nothing to do with the programme. We even had a literally net zero, generation zero reception with one of our clients, Savills, where it cost me £22 to put this on by getting last minute sponsorship from Budweiser to actually come up with some beer. I went to Tesco, got some ice, brought it back, I got some buckets, and had to get 2 tables in the back of a taxi to actually have somewhere to put it in this sort of the Glasgow's first green office. That was a huge success. I couldn't get rid of them, not least of the 3 beers. We had people from Texas, from Finland, from Iceland, and that, was for me worth going. Going to the event in the green zone wasn't, but all of the things we did in a way were really successful. And I think it's that sort of innovation and the meeting collectively of all of the people. It's really important. But I've done it from my personal business perspective, but the actual thing that government and the climate change deniers and everybody who doesn't think that their electric vehicle is going to run out and it won't work, is that this is happening and we're woefully behind. It's all about accelerating, embedding policies. So I think, and our report, which comes out on Monday, we're basically saying these are the gaps, and this is what the government actually needs to be doing, to be thinking not just about hydrogen electric vehicles. It goes a lot further deeper. We've got to think about rail, we've got to talk about airlines, the hard to abate sectors. It's a huge issue. So I think what COP26 did momentarily was really to get people to stand up and ask the question, what's going on? I felt that, in many ways, as you often get, it's the people there making the noise. There were protests before. I can tell you loads of funny stories that happened there, but I won't go there. But I think the main point, in terms of business, yes, you had to be there. Whether they got that much out of it, I don't know. But yeah, it was great to go to the CBI dinner and, Kwasi Kwarteng, John, what's his name? Kerry, yeah, and packs of people in the room, and it was like that was a really good, seeing Jacinda from New Zealand being beamed, all of those things were really worthwhile, and you'd want to be there and to be invited to that. But you know, equally, there are a lot of people who weren't there. Because, so, you know, I just think that there was. I also think it went on too long, but maybe that was a blessing for you know, Alok. So he actually got something out of it in the end. But yeah, it's 12. Well, it was 2 weeks, and it's exhausting. So after the first bit, in terms of communications, people were sort of like, oh, we've done that. So the people who were in the second week, I think it was into like newsworthiness was like petering out, and then we came back with crescendo to say, yes, we found something at the end. So I'd probably stop there because I'm going to talk all night otherwise. And there you are.
That's great, Jill. Thank you very, very much. Well, I think it's really interesting the point, because there are in some ways two separate COPs in the Blue and Green Zone. So I think that's really interesting, because there's the negotiations going on and also the business side. So I think that's quite fascinating to think about whether it was two separate, whether one was better, you know, a good COP and one was not so good, or how it worked out. But anyway, Rishi, so we're going to move on to you next to give a view of CIPR and sort of a bit about what you think on
Brilliant. I'll start with the personal. There's always a good story starts with the personal. I was at your event actually, and I was one of the people who came out at the end. I thought so too.
I became a barmaid again.
It was a lot of fun, and I think that was one of the events actually that summed up for me, because the international mix. You know, I've never met any Icelandic MPs before, and it wasn't necessarily that relevant to my day job or my life, but actually the fact that there were others doing that same battle for good in climate really was one of the my key takeaways from COP. So I think to start with, I mean, before I went, this was my first COP. My boss is a veteran of 5-6 COPs and sort of prepared us a little bit. And Bridie Worthington had given us this wonderful anecdote that the way to think about COP is a combination between a political party conference, a trade show, and a protest/festival. And it did not fail to disappoint. It was all three of those. And we know how we feel after 3 party conferences, if you ever have to do that, and try and do that for 2 weeks. So your point about the exhaustion by the end, on 5.5 hours sleep for 2 weeks, I'm sort of still recovering now, I think, and until that Christmas break, not come soon enough. Now, what first hit me was the scale of the importance of this. And I feel I'm very proud, actually, that we were able to host COP. It was a real honour. It was very difficult, and I have sympathy, actually, both ways of the government, because it was difficult hosting something in this small window between pandemic strains. We were lucky. You know, if it was happening now, would it even have any of the successes that we did have? So it's quite, you know, there are some things that worked out well, some things that worked out very badly. Now, politically, let me start with the positives. I do think we moved on from Paris. At Paris, I think we were 3.6 degrees, and after Glasgow, we were at 2.7 degrees, which is a target from the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions. There was definitely progress in the countries now will come back every year. So there's definitely progress on that, and that can only be a good thing. But that's a huge gap from 1.5 degrees, which we know has to be the target. If we do not get close to 1.5 degrees, the effects are catastrophic. The effects are bad at 1.5 degrees, but if we don't get any close to 1.5 degrees, we're in real danger. And I start by making this for me, though I obviously here as a Labour councillor, a Labour politician, it's not party political. I'm delighted to say it exists, because it makes dealing with some of your backbenchers a little bit less odious and less tedious, because you neutralise some of them, and it's really important. I salute the work you do, because we need more education and information on this. People are so ill-informed of climate. I should probably you say it's the same with finance, but I spent 13 of the last 17 years of my career in climate, so I kind of eat, drink, and sleep this every day, as well as chairing London's pension schemes and having won awards for our ESG approach. So I have a couple of weird hobbies around this that make this my sort of raison d'etre. So the one thing I would say, though, I accept your points around we should separate the domestic policies. I do think you can't separate domestic policies from your ability to lead others. And I think things like the airplane duty, things like that were own goals in the wrong time. And genuinely as an environmentalist, I just wish that hadn't happened, because it would have been better to then not undermine other points being made. Now, one thing that back to the positives, I do think we can, 1.5 is still within reach. So I think we can leave COP with that hope that we still can do that, and we have to. Now, the sense of urgency for me didn't quite come through. What was great was that press coverage, 2 weeks, and really good coverage. The BBC didn't feel required to wheel out Norman Tebbit and other climate deniers for balance every time. And I'm glad we're moving on from that nonsense, absolute nonsense. And we really got to stop making it a debate about the science, because that is really something that, for me, that's a positive that we take away from COP. And actually, the polling coming through, I think it was something else I've seen that was 30% of people sort of ranked it as one of their top issues now, which I think is becoming consistently key. And I was saying before we came in that I was doing a debate on the Indian vote, and that was the third issue for Indian voters in the UK, 1.4 million of us. You know, it's kind of it's becoming increasingly important for different communities in different ways. Now, the key thing, the other thing was a lot of absences. And I think the way to judge this is actually to play back the cars, cash, trees, and coal. Now, firstly, the cars. Only 24 countries signed up for this, and the agreement was really notable for its absences. Things like the US, China, and Germany, I mean, that's where most of our cars are bought from and made from, were not at that table. So though we will spin it as a success, we must look in the detail of these things, and that's really the devil is always in the detail. So the cash, the $130 trillion. Now, I love the number, and my day job, I was involved with our £100 billion commitment by 2025, and it's important these ladder up. But actually, that's the proof is in the pudding is in the tasting. And if that money is not moving, and you know, I know from my pensions work, the number of times we send back ESG slides from our fund managers who are telling us we're all ESG, we're doing this in net zero. And when actually, unfortunately, Muggins here as councillor, they normally look for a sleepy, you know, ward councillor. You're messing with the wrong person, because I will run through all your SBTI, science-based targets initiatives, and I'll run through all of your announcements of what you're saying and hold you to account. And there is a lot of green wish and green wash in this. And we have to be really careful of this. And this is one of the big things we take away. Trees, again, I mean, I welcome the announcements, declarations on trees, but I just wanted to remind everyone that in 2014, the New York Declaration of Forests also set a target of deforestation by 2030, and we found that and with an interim goal for a 50% reduction by 2020, and actually we found in 2019 that there has been forest loss that were 41% higher after the declaration. So the proof will be in the pudding will be in the tasting. Now I hope we have to get this right, so I do want this to succeed. And then finally on coal, I mean, phase out, phase down does make a big difference. We can't just gloss over this, and there is a big significance to this. But it is right, we have made progress on that. So I'll give you that one to be generous. And you know, you asked me to comment on what would the Labour Party have done differently. And I mean, so some of it, as your framing of this is absolutely right. It is a global piece. I think some things like cutting overseas aid lost our ability to actually negotiate, especially on the $100 billion, not my $100 billion funding target. I must confuse the two. But in fact, if I can get NatWest, which is a relatively medium-sized bank in the UK, to commit to $100 billion of funding by 2025, it's really disappointing that we can't get global governments to commit to $100 billion. I appreciate it's philanthropic. It's not, you know, our funding is a commercial basis, but that one really stuck in the craw that we just didn't get there. And I think that was partly because of our world standing and our ability to convince others. I think that would be different if we hadn't cut overseas aid. I think also it's now recognised that we need to get to, from the UK perspective, we need to get to 60 billion pounds of investment to reach our net zero pieces, and there's quite a gap in the policy gap underlying that, and I think that's becoming increasingly apparent. And though I think it worked for COP, the gap between policy, and particularly, you know, my poor team were analysing the 1,000-page document dump the week before COP of all the net zero policies, and I've actually read the bloody things on the trains back from Glasgow now. But you know, they've made progress. There's lots of gaps, and the devil of this stuff is all in the detail. And we need to make sure we've got net zero tests on future policies. I think it's really important. There's big gaps in the homes and buildings strategy, which we really need to. The number of heat pumps we need to install and need to ramp up is huge. I think our own piece on thinking about adaptation finance as well, and thinking about nature and biodiversity. It was good to see nature come up at COP, but it's still not really taken seriously, and the ecological crisis that we're facing isn't really being taken into account at the moment. So I guess just the sort of our priorities would be making sure that nature and ecological emergency is being factored into all these things. There are nature-based solutions. Some of these will be climate offsets, some of the preserving trees will be there. Just transition, absolutely key. Whether we talk about, and the fact that we had such a battle to get it called a green plus gilt, just to call it something different because of political differences, it was nonsense. I mean, what a waste of my CEO, my CFO, me getting my CFO to write letters to Boris and Rishi, other Rishi. It was kind of like, kind of just like, this is not productive when we're ending up agreeing, violently agreeing. And I think things of just transition I would sort of flag to the audience here is inclusivity, thinking about female voices, voices for colour, and how do we bring those different voices into climate, because that's how we get solutions to work and bring society with us. Because your poll, I'm always worried about the polling. I know it's helpful to start with that, because actually if we lose the public's goodwill on this, we won't succeed. And I think that's where we do agree that we need to succeed on this. Place-based and what's that action locally. And I was really pleased to see regional mayors out in force, to see from all around the world, speak to mayor of Vancouver and one random party. You kind of, that was the sort of madness of this. So see 1 minute John Kerry walking by, and the next minute Leonardo DiCaprio. And my boyfriend's only interested in the second one, but I mean, I thought John Kerry was pretty cool. Less cool Theresa May, but I mean, she was good. She was there. And then sector-based bit. So we have to think about what does this look like per each sector, and how does that. What do those transition plans look like? So it needs to be there. Just transition and fairness needs to be at every policy discussion, and we need to be thinking about this. And really, the thing I'll end on is that we need to now convert commitments, which are really important. We made big progress on commitments to be deeds, not words. Otherwise, we will end up being all blah 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 blah.
Yeah, which is what Greta Thunberg said.
Indeed, indeed.
Fantastic, thank you very much. That was really quite good to look at it. If I can ask everyone to have a think of any questions they want to ask, because I'll be coming to you in a sec. But what I do want to kind of ask is, we've said what the question of the event was kind of what's it mean for the Johnson government, and what I'm kind of hearing from you is this is a cross-party issue, that there's not really any sort of big, and I think that, you can see it pretty much that there's not a huge amount of difference between the parties. I suppose my question would be, is there, will a bigger difference? Will there be a bigger sort of separation between the two parties as the election nears? And actually, is this even a big political issue? Are we going to go towards the next election thinking, as we usually do, about the NHS, about the economy, about all the other things to think about? Is obviously not COP26, but net zero and climate change going to be rising up, or is it always going to be remaining as a sort of maybe fourth, fifth, maybe sort of around their issue? So I suppose, Chris, if I come to you first about that second question.
Yeah, I mean, if it's fourth or fifth top issue, then that's probably progress from elections gone by, and therefore I think that that's probably a good thing. I think ultimately, if we have political parties that are competing with each other to have better green policies, then that's also going to be a good thing in the long run. I don't think that it will be an issue that defines the election. I think that, looking back at previous elections, when it's been the first or this election or that, the Brexit election or whatever, yes, okay, these are things that are important, and the environment will and climate change will continue to be of salience, but I don't think that it's going to be the tipping point for for large numbers of voters. I think that will ultimately always end up going back to the economy, back to the NHS, or back to actually what makes, what appeals to them on an individual level, what makes them richer. I don't think it's going to be, I don't think the macro of the environment or climate change is necessarily going to be tipping anyone either way. I think that's actually that tied into where I see the Green Party, which is something that I guess we can touch on quickly. I don't think that the Green Party will be particularly electorally relevant. Yes, okay, their support might increase by a few points, but there isn't going to be some sort of green revolution or green surge like some people think there is, in my view. And I think that's just because other parties will still their policies. And yes, maybe that succeed. That means that they do ultimately succeed in their aim, but I don't think we're going to end up having such dissatisfaction with other parties' green policies that all of a sudden the Green Party end up coming through and taking more votes and more seats. So yeah, I think ultimately the way we're heading is good for climate change and good for the environment, but I don't think it's going to become the tipping point for many voters.
That's interesting. I was noticing that there was, I think, an uptick in green support in polling whilst COP26, and I was wondering whether that was literally because we're using the word green a lot more.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think there are debates even within our industry. I won't go into the nerdery of it, but how do you poll the Green Party? Do you put them in your initial prompt, or do you put them in a sub prompt? And it's still kind of difficult to know. Ultimately, I don't think at least in 2017, not sure about 2019, but they didn't stand in a lot of the seats across the country. You can't include them in the first prompt. They're not going to, you know, however many people might want to vote them, they don't even get the opportunity to vote for them. So I think that their presence is ultimately good for the other parties. And as I say, if other parties are going to try and outdo each other, or the major parties are going to try and outdo each other on the agreed policies, then ultimately that's going to be a good thing in the long run.
John, if I touch you, will there be clear blue water in the next election between the Conservatives and Labour view on climate change?
Possibly. I think I find myself, I think there's a difference in tone between what Rishi said and what I've said, but I actually agree with virtually everything on the content of what he said. And I think that's indicative of the way, you know, and we shouldn't take it for granted. I spent a lot of time talking to Conservative parties in other countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. You know, this is a huge divisive issue across the political divide. Now, I think there are divisions here, but we've got a different kind of division. We totally accept, yes, we need to get to 1.5. Yes, we need to reach net zero. Yeah, the aim is the same. And I think a lot of the policies to get there is probably the same as well. I think it's the how rather than the what is where I think there will be a division. And I think my sense of the politics of it, yeah, I think Chris is right. This isn't going to be, we're not going to fight an election on climate. But I think the really key issues that are coming up in the next few years is the decarbonisation agenda at some point in the next decade is going to start hitting the stuff that really affects your day-to-day life in a way that it just hasn't done until now. We've actually got a pretty good record in the UK on decarbonisation. We've wiped out the best part of half our emissions since 1990. But how have we done that? We've done that by cutting emissions in the power sector, which if you're at home and you turn the lights on, you're not thinking about where that came from. When you're getting a new car, which Jill's touched on, when you're thinking about particularly the heat pumps issue, and you talk about insulating your house, terribly old building stock in this country, how you navigate those challenges, I think, I hope there isn't massive division over it, but I think political parties' answers to that question is the thing that I think is going to potentially be the most divisive bit.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, just chipping in, it's when it impacts on you, and that's not, you know, this is not a standalone issue. It runs through all of our lives now, how we work, live, rest and play. Our net zero is part of that, and that means you know, passenger duty, it means heat pumps, it means electric vehicles, it means the lights don't turn up because, you know, Storm Arwen, what was all that about? You know, oh yeah, there is a problem and there's going to be another one. There's a whole problem about resilience in the system. You know, can we actually cope? Because climate change is here and now. So that's where it impacts on people, and it impacts when it's about their lives, and that's where it becomes an election issue. So certainly where I live, in Tim Farron's jumping up and down saying this is terrible to my client, Electricity North West. No, it's fine once you actually understood the scale of the challenge, when you actually gave him the information, classic public affairs approach, was you give absolute saying this was beyond of the scale of anything we've ever had to deal with, and it was incredible thing, you know. And that's what I'm trying to say is, yeah, it becomes an issue when it affects or it impacts on you directly. So whether it's somebody saying, oh well, do you think that's going to happen? No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think my car's going to run out, or my white van, you know, it's going to ruin my business. All of those opinions are there, but when it actually impacts on them, that's when it impacts on the ballot. And that's really, whether you're Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer or whoever, you've just got to accept that all policy comes back to net zero. And that's where we are. If you really want to get to where you both want to get to. And the only other point I would say is that the one thing that I don't think it is party political, in the sense that it was. There were people who were always denying this, so it wasn't going to be an issue, and certainly are in Australia. You know, and other places. But what we had at that joint session in the Green Zone, it was quite clear that in Parliament, they are at one. I think, you know, it is that they accept it, and I think there is that consensus, and that's what will help, basically. And I think that's the way it should be. But you know, it's the same old. People are not worried if the bins aren't taken, the lights don't know, will they got to pay more, or think it's unfair. And that's how you need to connect net zero to get that appeal. We've got questions coming online.
I've got questions coming in. I just wish you want to say anything on
If
that.
I may, just because I've just been a bit controversial, because I actually think it's going to ramp up as a policy issue, because I think it's going to cut through every policy area. And I think whether it's the black carbon issues, other issues, budget, where we lose fuel duties, whether it's the way we have to think about our housing, whether we think about what, after an austerity, councils have declared climate emergencies without the funding or ability, and the officers have all been gone. These don't exist in councils anymore. People have now, the job that's being advertised most on Indeed was maybe Giggle was the climate emergency officer across every borough, it seemed to be. So if anyone wants a climate emergency officer job, there's some good jobs going on that. But I think that's going to cut through, and that's if we get it right, it should cut through in every policy area. It cuts through on transport, and you're right, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. The energy was relatively easy, and I was at the centre of that. In my day job, I financed wind farms, solar parks, biomass around the country. Never thought I'd finance a solar park in the UK when I started my career, but that became a thing. And how we transformed energy was fascinating, because even though it was bloody hard, it's nowhere near as hard as heat and transport will be, because I see this from between Leicester and London. People love their cars and their transport, and the battle we're going to have with the public about decarbonising transport. And while the train system was wet, so I'm a Leicester City fan, so I was up a game for my sins, so just very quickly, and we were playing Villa away, £15 return from Birmingham, but £45 to get to Leicester to see the in-laws. You're kind of like, there's something wrong with our system. If we want to encourage people to use public transport, we're not going to get there. We can't we're going to need some quite fundamental transformation. And that's why I think it could be a big political hot potato. And it shouldn't be, because the 2008 Climate Change Act showed that working together is the best outcome on climate on this. And that's where my heart is. But I just think that it can't not be cross-cutting all policy.
Great, thanks, Bashir. So I want to bring in questions. So Rachel, do you want to read out any that
there's lots to read. Sarah McCracken, Sarah, do you want to turn your microphone on and ask your questions?
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Really enjoying this discussion. And it was lovely to hear some of the nature-based solutions coming through. I'm head of fundraising communications for the RSPB in Northern Ireland. But there was a comment earlier about the number of MPs within the caucus. So I'm just curious to know about that pressure felt by MPs to engage. How much pressure comes from constituents, and how big an impact does constituent pressure have on MP action? And just sort of following on from that, I think it's two questions in one. So while I have the floor, do you think there'll be the same sort of political will and engagement when COP is hosted elsewhere, or will we lose momentum on the need for targets and meaningful action to counter the nature and climate emergency?
Thanks. How many questions are there? Should we take a few in a bunch?
Okay, Paul Beckford. Paul, are you able to turn your microphone on and ask a question? Paul has three.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel, and hello, everyone. Got a couple of questions, really. First one is, what do we need to do in the final 11 months, as it is, of the UK presidency, to ensure that sort of targets that were agreed in Glasgow are progressing and on the way to being met? And secondly, are we doomed to miss 1.5 degrees unless we come up with some sort of international carbon pricing system? Thank you.
All right, shall I take those, because there's four there. So there's from memory, that's kind of constituency impact, whether there's a pressure for constituency, whether it'll be a big enough issue with COP26 held elsewhere, how we kind of monitor it, and whether we're kind of the carbon pricing will impact 1.5%. So does anyone want to deal with that?
I'm happy to go with the engagement one, because I think slightly anecdotally, before lockdown, you do council surgeries, we did sort of area action groups. And though you don't call it climate change, the ones on air quality were attended. I represent Bloomsbury Ward, just down the road. My ward has the lowest car ownership in the country, or was last time I checked, about 20%. But packed rooms on snowy winter nights to come talk about this. And we won't not capture that as a climate change passion on the topic, but it's going to come up. It comes up more and more. Sometimes I think the campaign groups I actually think the Divest campaign is a helpful campaign, because it helps bring some issues to life, but actually at that. again, let me give Alan a
Well,
chance.
if I move on to Jonathan State, you know, you a bit disparaging about what Glasgow was like. Would you attend the COP somewhere else? So will there be that
I'm looking
focus?
forward to Sharm el-Sheikh. Scuba diving. Yeah, but I think it is a different feel. I mean, when you're in Glasgow, it feels cold, dank, and you know, quite
It was the
depressing.
warmest I've ever been in
Well,
Glasgow.
not on Saturday morning, I was frozen.
That's true,
and I
that's
waited
true.
for the Tesla to pick me up. Anyway, so yeah, I think it is different. I think it's going back to that international, global thing. It's not. I think, you know, we were probably very UK centric. It was at our show. I felt, you know, you get that feeling in terms of the MP engagement or where the pressure comes from. I think I'll go back really to that, you know, impact assessment. They will get, you know, in other areas like other groups and net zero as well, it comes through those issues which are connected about affordability, just transition. They can't afford it. How am I going to afford this? You know, it's a real problem that's brewing for all politicians on a domestic basis. But I think where it really is about, you know, who are the climate change protesters? Are they, you know, as they would have been probably not even that long ago, the sort of sandal wearing vegans and all of those sort of, you know, without being, hope there aren't any sandal wearing vegans on the call. But you know, what I'm saying, and I'm just quoting something, that is that impression that, you know, this is not, that you're not one of them. But I think there's much, there will be a whole move and change to people. It's now sort of more acceptable, like it's on trend to care. And I think that's one of the things about climate change. It's really transformed into sort of like an acceptable thing, rather than sort of saying, oh, well, you sort of like trees or whatever. So I think we've seen a bit of an acceleration in that. In terms of MP support, I think it's there in droves, but I think it is, and this is one of the things that we have to remember, it's not about us, certainly not about 2050, is not about me, it's about tomorrow's generation. And that's where it really impacts, you know. So we did our generation and, you know, net zero ambassadors, and, you know, the connection between these, you know, young, you know, 14 and 15-year-olds, our Greta Thunberg's, you know, Nina, she's absolutely brilliant at what she's doing. She's coming to the thing as well. But getting that connection with the MP and the younger generation is really important, because it is about that legacy and making things, real change happen. So I think that's another thing in terms of polling, is what the young people, you know, tomorrow's voters will care about it more.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, in some of the stuff that we've done, we have seen greater levels of support for COP, and you know, impression that it was more of a success among older voters than we have among younger. I don't know if that's just an element of, you know, cutting through, and, you know, you are always going to get young activists that are going to be, you know, very engaged and highly engaged, and I think there's probably a greater disparity between how engaged they are, or the most engaged and the least engaged than there are among older voters. But yeah, this isn't a young person issue, I don't think, and maybe that is older people, or older people, you know, considering the younger generations and not wanting this to be a problem for their children, or wanting to fix it in time for their children or their children's children, etc. But yeah, it doesn't feel as much of just a solely young person issue as perhaps it did with the politics 5 years ago. I think in terms of just the MP engagement, you know, we do speak to MPs relatively regularly, but we're not quite as aware of what's in their mailbag. I do think that some of the behavioural work that we've done, there is, as kind of Jill alluded to, I think there is a cultural shift among people, and whether it is the sandal wearing vegan sort of caricature that we can bring about, you know, people are more in tune to have a plant-based diet, or more likely to cut down on their meat consumption. Yeah. They might drive electric cars. Yeah, okay, they might want heavy incentives from government to pay for it, or pay for their first one, but they're willing to give it a go. They're definitely not as turned off to it as they would have been, again, 5 years ago. And we are seeing that cultural shift, and I think it is about how policymakers can take voters on that journey with them. And I think, you know, Rishi and John, you know, are going to debate about how you know, how different parties end up doing that. but I think there is a desire from the public to go on that journey.
Yeah.
They are going to need not necessarily persuasion, but they're going to need heavily incentivizing, I think, to go that extra step. But you know, it has happened before. It's happened with something as very basic as recycling. I think it's all about taking it to the next step, which I think you mentioned, John.
And if, John, I'd just briefly ask you to sort of answer Paul's questions on so how do we ensure targets in that, and a bit on that sort of I think the carbon budgeting kind of aspect of this.
Yeah, I think the carbon pricing thing's a really interesting question. I mean, I'm very in favour of carbon pricing. I think it's shown to work. I think it's a really good market mechanism. Actually, from a conservative side, I think trying to come up with narratives that work for people who are a little bit instinctively iffy about this, I think it does work. I think it's politically incredibly toxic in a lot of countries. I wish it wasn't. We're trying to do some work to try and stop that from being the case. I think ultimately you do want to move to a stage of international price for carbon if you can do, but I think other countries are acting on it, and I think we've done it kind of piecemeal in different areas here, but I think it is something we should look at. I think the other interesting aspect of the pricing issue is these carbon tariffs and putting those on board, and I think that's something that's really starting to gain some traction now. There's a lot of support quietly within on the Conservative backbench for this. The EU's moving ahead with it in the next few years for a very limited range of sectors, but that's something that actually I've noticed talking again to more sceptical people. The first line you always hear is, yeah, well, what about China? And I think that if you can show that, and I think that's a very perfectly relevant point, although I try to reach a slightly different conclusion on what we should do with it. That's not a reason not to act, that is a reason to act more. But I think there is something in trying to think about pricing carbon imports in a way that I do think actually engages people who are more sceptical about the general issue of taking climate action. I mean, I think on targets, I mean, that the only answer is political pressure. I mean, I think we've all made the point that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and and in a sense that the answer to COP, as I think Jill said, the answer is it is neither, because the answer as to whether COP26 is a success, if we can ever answer it, is years down the line when we say, well, yeah, those pledges were met or they weren't met, and that's a kind of nebulous question until that point. I think there's a lot more we can do in the UK with that pressure and using our presidency. And I hope Alex Sharma will keep his role and be given the authority by government to have this kind of John Kerry type roving international role to do it. But I think overall, it is about trying to use our own domestic action and using our diplomatic network to do what we can to push it. But that isn't an easy thing to do at all. So.
Tiny build up, mate, on the carbon pricing, also equally supportive. I think Nick Stearns has a very good paper on the social cost of carbon. And I think we need to make sure we're factoring that in, because there are impacts of this that are inadvertent. The credibility of carbon pricing and markets is really, really at risk because of previous mistakes and missteps. And then I think in terms of keeping it alive, I think congratulations on getting over to the COP presidency. We're getting the annual NBCs, and I think that's what, rather than it being Sharm el-Sheikh COP, I think that's what will keep it alive. And the rumor is that China will come big in Egypt, and we have to all hope that happens if we have any collective paper 1.5.
I'm keen to get a few more questions in, and time is against us. So there's one in the room, and are there?
Although Sarah has confessed to being a tree hugger, but not a sandal-wearing vegan.
It's cold sandals. I have to say, I do feel like we have to apologise to sandal-wearing vegans, particularly in Glasgow. But so, question in the room.
Yeah, it's lovely to be living in London. I can afford to be passionate about climate change. I have friends who live in the country who can't. They've got gas central heating. I've got a friend in Northumberland. She's an old lady. She's been without power and heat for more than a week. Trains are great if they're going anywhere, but as you say, they're very expensive between some areas. Cars, if you live in the country, there are no bus services. You need your car, and there aren't car charging plants. So my question to the panel and everybody is, where is the will to do something about this so that we can afford all this and make it happen?
Let's go back to the just transition and who pays. That's the thing. And incentives, I think really the incentives point is really important. In the residential sort of private rented sector. If you're a private landlord, are you really going to say, yeah, I'm going to convert my property to
if it's a Victorian house, they can't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I live in the country and there is no bus service, and I'm buying my car. I'm getting an electric car, not a Tesla. But you know, I've got the umbrella. But you know, it's a very different perspective, I think, and you are lucky in many ways to be, you know, to have that infrastructure and a public transport system that actually is affordable, or you know, gives you an incentive to make that choice. Whereas that's not possible for me and a lot of people outside London, regardless of whether you're in the country or not. So, you know, how do you get that world-class leadership and actually saying this is, you know, there are real cost benefits and, you know, social benefits to gain that investment and taking that risk. And that's what we need in post-pandemic age, is that green recovery, that we can use this as the moment to really say, yeah, we are getting it back. And really, I know we sort of agree, but that's what I would have wanted to come out of COP, is that real sort of sense that it is urgent and we are investing and we are going to do this. And it's taking it, you know, that acceleration forward, you know, and I think that's my disappointment really.
So just to lean on that, we're all in a room, or virtual and half physical room full of public affairs professionals, all with representing sort of different organisations and a lot of businesses and charities, etc. What's the best thing for them to engage with this agenda? Because, you know, we talked about that greenwashing. There's possibly also a lot of cap in hand. Is that sometimes you know, the feeling that we've got organisations that are looking to go cap in hand on what they in order for them to decarbonise? So what should we be telling businesses and organisations that they should be doing? Is there something they should be doing?
So I guess it's probably goes to my day job. So I head up climate at Stone Bank at NatWest Group, and we've moved bank from being, you know, 15 years ago saying it wants to be the oil and gas bank, and now to be, you know, Alison Road, the G7 and G20 engaging on the world stage on climate, because we've shown leadership. I took 15 on my C-suite, my chairman, to COP, and got them deeply ingrained and involved in this. And chairman who then can go and influence other chairman, and unfortunately too many men of view banks across Europe and around the world. Now that's key. Every organisation has to start, and I'm starting. It's been a 7-year marathon for me, and that has to start. We're going to hit net zero goals. Every organisation needs to be thinking about what that plan looks like, understanding what their carbon footprint is now, what their carbon footprint is like to be like, but also to be not just risk focused, but what's those opportunities? Whether it's a charity, whether it's a corporate, and what's those business opportunities you can grab? You know, you talk about green recovery. That's what we need to be thinking about. You know, the government talks about the levelling up agenda. We need to be thinking about what's that growth story, what are those opportunities? And there are from climate, there are investment opportunities, there are different ways and benefits of doing business differently. And we do need to do that. And that was, again, the other positive I didn't mention earlier, was the voice of business and finance was at the table. The problem for me is still who is not in the room.
Yeah. Sorry, do we have more questions online? Or
no, it was just a slight observation. I think it's still an hour and 5 minutes into use the phrase levelling up.
Yes. I was just going to ask Chris, because you probably speaking to business leaders, you poll business leaders on this as well.
As a company, yeah, me less so. So yeah, I might struggle on this bit a little bit. I mean, I think coming back from the infrastructure point, I think that, you know, ultimately we do have a little. I guess we are a little bit London centric in what we're saying, and I think, you know, sometimes doing public opinion work is eye-opening, because you know, it grounds you in what the everyday person kind of does think, and yeah, I think it is. Like, I did kind of allude to this earlier, but I think, you know, the key stress that I would make is that you have to make this easy for people. If you want people's behaviour to change, you have to make things easy for them, and I think that it's fine to make it very easy for people in cities, but less easy to make it easy for people in rural areas. But ultimately, you know, for us to get the to get the commitments that we needed to meet these targets, we have to get everyone on board, and I think that's going to be key for government going forward.
John, I don't know whether you want to say about, you know, do you guys, you know, engaging with businesses on this issue? Is there a feeling from the government that business is not doing enough, or that it needs to do more on something?
I mean, we don't directly tend to deal with businesses. We tend to just work in the kind of Westminster space and things. I think it's about finding, as Chris says, about finding ways, not just for individuals, but for businesses to make it easy for this to be something that they want to do. I mean, I think it's so easy to talk about the costs, and they're relevant, and we shouldn't shy away from that debate, and we have to get it right. But actually, when you see all the companies internationally, these huge global companies that have signed up to net zero targets, and we've got to be appropriately skeptical about what that means and whether it includes all of their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and all of that. But they're not just doing it out of the warmness of their heart. They're doing it because there's a recognition that this is the future, and we are going to do this. And sensible businesses are taking those decisions now rather than when they're forced to do it. I mean, I think there's been a bit of electric car skepticism, I think, but actually the electric car market's fascinating to me. I mean, I think people are cynical about driving electric cars until they do it. And I think when they do it, they turn out that they're brilliant. They're clean, they're quiet, they are dropping in price, and they're not where we need to be, but there's a lot of estimates that say they will reach price parity, sticker price parity in the next couple of years. The lifetime costs are already lower than having a petrol car. The range is massively improving, the battery quality is massively improving. And I think you look at what the electric car market's done. When the government announced this 2030 phase-out date for the sales of new internal combustion engine vehicles, there was this sense, I think, in government that this was going to be quite a moment, and the industry went, yeah, okay. And I think and then the reason why, because they knew this was coming, they knew this was the future. They don't want to sell these cars because they know in 10 years' time people aren't going to want to drive them. Now, I don't say therefore that makes it easy. We've got to get it right. Charge point rollout is a major thing, and it is just so patchy across the country. There's some areas where it's actually pretty good. There's some areas that are well short of where they need to be. But I think if the government focuses on those things, business wants to grasp the opportunity. We've just got to make it easier for them to do it.
But on that, you also think about fairness, and that's why the public transport and buses and the electrification of that is absolutely key. But also for what do you do about scrappage schemes? People who have use their car once a year, take their nan to the hospital. But if we don't think about these on those journeys, we risk really leaving people behind and then losing the polling. We need to keep the people there engaged in the climate journey.
Fantastic. We're sadly pretty much out of time. So I just want to say, first of all, big thank you to all of our panel. Can you give them a round of applause? I also just wanted to do, I said, if the panel's taught me anything, that this is a highly nuanced debate. But I said I would do this at the start, I thought I would do this at the start, so I'm going to carry on and do it, which is ask everyone to raise their hand if they thought it was a good cop or bad cop, or whether they thought it did what they wanted it to do, maybe. So if you're online, if you want to raise your virtual hand, if you thought it was a good cop, and the same in the room if you want to raise your actual hand. And if you thought it was a bad cop, don't raise your hand, basically. So.
I said it's neither. So
I think we've got a lot of in-betweens. I'm kind of tempted to put my hand up. Well, I don't think that worked very well, but that would work as well. Yeah. So yes, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. If you're at home, you unfortunately don't get to have the drinks and refreshments, but you can go to your fridge and get them there. I think we've got, there'll be a new committee in place for the CIPR Public Affairs Group in the new year. So there'll be lots more events and things coming up in 2022. So keep posted, and thanks for joining us.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, there we are. We could go all night.